This is Woods Runner on Audiobook Select by Gary Paulsen. Samuel smelled it before he saw anything, not just the smoke from the fires, but the thick, heavy smell. Blood. Death. No. The single word took over his brain. Part of his thinking was automatic, leading him to act with caution and move with stealth. But the front part, the thinking part, hung on to one word. He made good time, running hard until his lungs seemed to be on fire, then jogging until he got his breath, then back to the full-out run. There was probably another half an hour of daylight before it was too dark to see. As he approached the settlement, he slowed down and moved off the side. It would do no good to run head-on if the attackers were still there. He was silent, listening keenly. Surely if anyone was still there, they would make some noise. All Samuel heard was the crackling of fire, the soft night sounds of evening birds. No human sound. At the edge of the clearing near his house, he paused, frightened, no, terrified, at what he would find. He was hidden in some branches, and he studied the area through the leaves to make sure it was clear before he stepped out. The cabin was gone, burned to the ground, side shed and all. Here and there an ember flicked and crackled, and some smoke rose in the evening sky, but the building was no more. In the distance he could see that the other cabins scattered throughout the clearing had been burned as well. Dreading what he might find, he forced himself to search through the ashes, looking for the slightest indication of bodies. He could not bring himself to think about what he was really looking for, his parents. His brain would not allow it, though he knew the death smell came from someone. He could not allow himself to believe it was from them, from mother and father. He found nothing in the ashes, and when he spread the search out around the cabin, moving in greater circles, he still found no trace that might have been his parents. But as the search loop widened, he began to come across bodies. His neighbors, shot down and hacked where they'd been fallen. They did not look like they had been people. What he found seemed more like trash, paper and cloth blown around the ground, but they were people, friends, and family he had known. A frantic need took him, the thought that the next body might be the one he dreaded most to find, and he ran from one to another, trying to identify them in the failing light. Most had been mutilated so badly it was hard to tell who they had once seen. Overton lay by his cabin, his shirt sleeves still not down on his wrists, chest and stomach filled with arrows, his scalp gone, so his face drooped without the top skin to hold it up. Samuel ran from body to body in gathering twilight until at last there were no bodies to find. No matter how fast he ran, how wide he ran, he did not find his parents, along with 6 or 7 others. They had not been killed, or at least not been killed there. They had may have been taken away. They had not been killed. He clung on to that thought. They had not been killed. He stood, his breathing ragged, sobbing softly. Twice he had thrown up, and the smell and taste, mixed with the tears of frustration and grief for his friends, and the rage for what had been done to them. He knew that if he lived to be 100, he would never lose the taste, the smell, or the images of what he'd seen, the madness of what men could do to other men in savage rage. Dark cotton now. He had circled through the settlement and was back at his own cabin, where it had been. There was nothing left that would furnish light. All of the candles had been melted, but he trapped some of the embers there were still glowing and made a campfire off the cabin a bit. In its light he found the woodpile, which oddly had not been burned, and at the side of the pile there was a stack of pine-pitch knots and roots that his mother used to start fires. The pitch concentrated in the knots burned with a smoky hot flame that lasted for an hour or more, and would work as a torch. Near the garden plot he found the oak shovel they had used to turn the earth for gardening. The attackers had overlooked it to the left as useless because anything of value had been taken or destroyed. There were 9 bodies to be buried before the coyotes, wolves, and bear came. He knew that he would be moving come daylight, tracking, looking for a sign. So the burying had to be done tonight. Carrying spare pine knots and the shovel, he went from body to body. He dug a shallow grave next to each one, knowing that it might not be enough to protect them, that scavengers might dig them up, but so pressed for time that he had no choice. He covered each as the best he could. 3 were children, and it did not take as long. And though it was hard to tell exactly who they were in the dark, with the condition of the bodies, he remembered the children laughing and the playing in front of the Olsons' cabin, the 2 boys and a little girl with a crude doll. He found the doll in the grass and wept as he buried it with the smallest body. He cried over each corpse, thinking of them living, thinking of them meeting in the cabin, living and talking, laughing and just being. And now, all gone, gone. He could not stop crying, thinking of his parents, wondering, worrying. It took 5 hours to bury everyone. It was still dark when he finished and looked around him. Then he realized that he shouldn't have said something over the bodies. He did not know the right words, something about ashes and dust, but he took another torch and went back to each grave and bowed his head and said, "Please, Lord, take them with you, please." It was all he could think to say, and he hoped it was enough. He went back to the campfire by his own cabin site and started looking into the flames, praying for safety for his parents, praying for the others who had not been killed, praying for the survived, but praying most for his parents and squatting by the fire, also praying for daylight to come so he would begin looking for them. And in half an hour, a little more, his eyes closed, and sleep came and took him down, until he was lying on his side by the fire, sleeping deeply with all the bad dreams that he'd known would come. Sleeping, with twitches and jerks and whimpers at first, then just sleeping. Sleep. The Americans. The American colonies consisted of 3 parts: the Continental, or regular, Army, the volunteer militia, including the elite Minutemen, and the Rangers, or small groups that were trained in guerrilla tactics. The Continentals bore the brunt of the fighting, and they were equipped much like the British, with smooth-bore brown-bess muskets and sometimes bayonets. Many of them also carried tomahawks, or small hand-axes, which could be very effective once past the first line of bayonets. The militia volunteers were usually used to supply the Continentals, but were quite often not as dependable or steady as they could have been when they had been trained better, and they often evaporated after receiving the first volley and before the bayonets came. Most of them were also issued with smooth-bore muskets and had some bayonets around them. The other had rifles, which were very effective at long range, but could not mount bayonets. Special ranger groups, such as Morgan's Rifles, had an effect far past the numbers because of rifles they carried. A rifle, by definition, has series of spiral grooves down the inside of the barrel. With the low pressure of black powder, the rifling then was a slow twist, grooved with a turn of about one rotation for 35 or 40 inches. A patched ball was gripped tightly in the bore and the groove rifling, and then the long bore, up to 40 inches, enabled a large powder case, which allowed the ball to achieve much higher velocity, more than twice that of the smooth bores, and the high rate of rotation or spin stabilized the ball flight, resulting in greater accuracy. That was Chapter 4 of Woods Runner by Gary Paulsen. To hear more of this book, go to our YouTube channel, Audiobook Select, and select the playlist Woods Runner by Gary Paulsen. We'll see you over at Chapter 5.